This is the Tapped In Podcast, the podcast for beverage distributors that want to empower their sales team to drive business results. Listen up and welcome back to another episode of the Tapped In Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Bud, with co-host Mikey. Mikey, how are you today, my man?
I'm doing good, man. Doing good. How's Bud?
We're doing good. We're back from a whirlwind tour of Missouri and rested, hopefully, a little bit. Hopefully I don't sound too groggy or too messy. I was up early for a doctor's appointment. I'm now chatting with you, doing another episode, my man.
Yeah.
So today we're going to talk about best practices for kind of what I would call the timing of setting up your variable pay, whether you do it monthly, whether you do it quarterly, whether you do it annually. Should different people have different intervals? Should different types of incentives or variable pay have different intervals? Kind of like a whole ball of wax around, when, how often, how connected should this be from results to actual pay? I think that's where we kind of want to get into that. Does that make sense, Mikey?
Yeah, for sure. We get quite a few questions, people wanting to know, what's the best schedule for incentives, monthly, quarterly, yearly, So yeah, I think it's gonna be a good episode to touch on.
And we're going to get into like a series of, there are different types that could lend themselves to one versus the other better, or one timeline versus another better. So this is going to be a more nuanced. I think you can take what you want and kind of play with some of this. We're going to talk about what we focus on and what we've seen some clients focus on and where we've seen some good success. So the first one kind of derives off of maybe the monthly to get us going. So monthly is where we spend a lot of time, probably see, what do you think, Mike? 99%?
Yeah,
At
maybe a
least
little bit more. Maybe 98. Yeah, there's a lot of quarterly as well too. Maybe some annual, maybe more total business focus. But yeah, I would say 90, anywhere between 98, 99% probably.
Yeah, most of the clients that we work with are focused on monthly. We actually have only one client that is not doing it monthly. They're doing it on a 60-day cycle. So they're doing 12 60-day cycles or 6 60-day cycles instead of 12 30-day cycles or 12 monthly cycles. And for me, this has always been the way that makes the most sense at the field sales rep level. So you can talk me into doing more quarterly and more annual stuff as you move away from frontline sales and you get into middle management and leadership. But the real crux of me being so focused around monthly payouts specifically is that we as humans have short-term focus, right? And
Absolutely.
that's just the nature of the beast. There's an incredible experiment called the Marshmallow experiment where the researchers took kids and they put them in the room, and it was like, with marshmallows, and you get like one or two marshmallows or whatever. It's like, if you don't eat the marshmallows, by the time I get back, I'll give you another marshmallow. And there's very few kids that didn't just eat the marshmallows. And it's because we are engineered to want instant gratification.
Yeah.
And we don't focus on, these incentives or these goals into quarterly very well if we're not designed that way, or we don't have that instinct. And most of us don't have that instinct. Most are grab that marshmallow and eat that marshmallow. So that to me is that it requires, to move to a quarterly, it requires us to think differently. And for a lot of field sales reps out there, it just makes more sense to stay highly motivated on a quick feedback loop and be flexible with the goals on a monthly basis, because you're going to be able to target stuff more sophisticatedly, manage it easier and keep their connection and their attention towards those short-term goals. And it's do this, get reward, do that, get reward, do this, get reward. That feedback loop is so short.
Absolutely, yeah. The instant gratification. The I want to know now how I did, and I want my money. If there's a dollar value behind it, um, and also in our ever shifting business with trends and the way what's hot today isn't always necessarily what's hot tomorrow. So monthly incentives, at least on the planning side, also makes sense to keep up with trends and what's happening in the market and be more responsive.
And typical monthly incentives we see or variable pay we see, these could be commission driven things like actual dollars, revenue, what we do, or it could be what we do at VXP, a GP goal and a volume goal, and it could be a pod goal or your classic PFP or MBO stuff. A lot of that kind of is the buckets of what I see day in and day out on monthlies and monthly payouts. Anything you think I'm missing, Mikey?
No, I mean, even if you are targeting, we see a lot of people that do target a volume goal or a gross profit goal, whether they're using VXP or not. And even still with that, I mean, monthly is still going to have its pros over quarterly and annually. Yeah, we all have our annual targets from our suppliers, but also there's so many things that can happen within a year. Like we saw, 2023 live, we watched it unfold. Nobody predicted that. So a couple other, benefits that would go into the monthly planning, whether even if you're doing a total volume too.
Yeah. And the if we did something like this is maybe this is a big dramatization, but if we set an annualized volume target and we know that field sales reps and we as humans are just we're delayed, we like instant gratification and we procrastinate. And if we don't reverse engineer that annualized program or annualized incentive or annualized volume target back to break it down into bite sizes being January, February, March, April, May, we're only going to focus on it in like November and December. Then we're going to realize how far away we are
Yeah.
and surrender and give up. It's a dramatization. That's just the way that I see it working. Like, and there's a lot of leaders out there that are like, well, I get a goal and then I reverse engineer it on my own. It's like, well, that's not necessarily like a field sales rep's goal or like job. That's our job as leaders to take what the business needs and the business requirements and what it demands from a financial side, from a volume side, from a partnership side with our suppliers. It's our job to actually break that up and present it in an organized, systematic way to the sales reps so that they have clear guidance on what they're going to actually do and what they actually need to get done, and that we can track and communicate that on a regular basis to them. That's what we do. That's what we as leaders do. And what the reps do is they go out and they work really hard on shorter term intervals to build up the pieces to reach that annualized goal.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's important right there because without those benchmarks along the way, I mean, how do you even really know where you're at? How do you even know how you're tracking towards your annualized goal without having some sort of benchmarking or being broke down month by month?
Yep.
And then the
Now,
sprints again too, right? I mean, the sprint, November, October, November, December, when you, like you said, when you realize how far behind you are, or maybe on the opposite end, hey, I'm tracking pretty good here. Maybe I'm going to lay off a little bit so I don't come in and overinflate my goal for next year. So
yeah, that's a good point. Now, let's move on to quarterly. So, quarterly, I get it. It can work. And there's pros of quarterly, like it balances some focus between short term return and long term return. I think there's more elegant ways you can manage it. It does reduce some kind of administrative work around setting a goal or a target. You can set that over a 3 month period. So if you are doing PFP or MBOs or you're doing volume and GP goals, you do them 4 times a year instead of 12 times a year. So you reduce some of your administrative headache around that. And there's also drawbacks in that too, because if there's a market shift in those 3 months, good or bad, you could end up having to redraw the goals, or and that could be good or bad for you. It could also create some administrative headache around maybe you don't get the product you're supposed to get in the right time frame for a PFP or a supplier incentive in some way. We know that happens even on a monthly basis. So that could cause some rejiggering in the PFP and the MBO side as well. The other side too is like, you know, it delays out the rewards. And if we know that we're reacting to getting that reward, I just find that moving a quarterly incentive that we're still going to have a 35 to 45 day focus window, which is probably going to happen in the last 30 days from a rep perspective. And they're just going to hammer everything out.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, pros and cons, right? Pros would also, I would say too, is with the longer tracking period of being the quarter. Now we have a little bit more data to go on too. You know, maybe if it's a pod placement or just a placement of any sort, instead of just within that 30-day window, yeah, you got the placement. But next month, that same placement in the cooler might be whatever next was on PFP or 2 months later. But with the quarterly tracking, now we have, the 90 days to kind of look at it and say, all right, well, was there a rebuy within that period? You know, that and anything else that we needed to track just to make sure that that pod was still there and it wasn't just a one-time place in and out just for the sake of grabbing some money. Um, Reduce pressure too, like you said, less pressure on the admin side, but also less pressure on the sales side too. You're not going to get that monthly instant gratification, but you're also not going to be scrambling every month to hit a bunch of different goals. And kind of, your head's a little flustered. You see that a lot when, a PFP list is, 2 or 3 pages long. I mean, where's my head at? Where's my focus at? And you kind of just feel a little flustered and you're running around. So, with a quarterly goal, it does give you a little bit more time to focus on that, and you don't feel like, all right, I have all this pressure to hurry up and hit all these, and in 1 month, and the next month I'm going to have a whole new list of things that I have to go hit as well. So,
Yeah, that comes back to my challenge with quarterly incentives, though, too, is that when you have 12 windows versus 4 windows, you do have to up the number of things that are on, and we'll just pick on supplier incentives alone. You do have to kind of up the number of supplier incentives that are active in any given month. And for me, we should be curating what those supplier incentives are and curating the focus to align with what the supplier schedule is, what we want to be doing, and what the season requires as well. Where if we're doing them quarterly, that cuts that down to 4 windows. So to have the same access or the same availability to every supplier around doing an incentive, that's just going to grow the list and the length of the list. And again, we're taking what we're kind of like high level doing is that we're taking a lot of complexity off of management's plate and put in managing that complexity, and we're putting that managing of that complexity onto the reps plate. And I
mhm.
just have I just don't like that. There's a bad opinion or bad viewpoint of that. Well, I don't like it or management per se. It's too complex or I don't want to do it. So I should just make my reps do it. And that's just not what our job is for my side. Now, where I'm cool with quarterly incentives is let's break these apart a little bit and let's talk about maybe doing some quarterly incentives for some leadership, sales leadership, and or middle management around quarterly goals, volume, profits, net income, EBITDA, things that are more financial in nature, maybe bottom line or below the gross profit line and more behind the scenes. If you're doing anything like that, that could be very compelling to me for that senior leadership in potentially that middle management role in my mind. Now, where that comes into play, there's a couple key parts about this. One is that I would consider doing it a carryover. So something that I learned from The Great Game of Business. It's a great book. If you ever want to read it or find a good book that's written by John, I think it's John Stack. No, this might be Jack Stack. I think it's Jack Stack. And he was the godfather, is the godfather of open book finance. So what he talks about when you build out these quarterly objectives and goals, that if you miss Q1, that miss gets rolled over to Q2. So the company doesn't keep that allocated bonus dollars from a Q1 miss.
Yeah.
It just doesn't pay it in Q1. And if you catch yourself back up to speed and get back on plan at the end of Q2, you get Q1 and Q2 payments, and so on and so forth for Q3 and Q4. So the idea behind this is that the carrot and the stick, like we're always moving the carrot and trying to keep the carrot out in front of us, but we're not completely taking the carrot away because you missed Q1, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's exactly how it was at Kellogg's, where there was quarterly bonuses that you could hit, um, and if you missed Q1, came in Q2 and crushed it, you didn't get Q1. Then what you had to do is you had to hit your annual goal, which was basically just all 4 quarters, and then you would get your true up, which was any other quarters that you missed along the way. So it was even more of an incentive. Like, okay, well, if I miss Q1 and Q3, if I go out and I just absolutely kill it in Q4, I'll get both of those months back at the end of the year, which was a bigger lump instead of getting caught up quarter by quarter. Which I mean, I feel like everybody there really loved that, to be able to get that money back if they missed it, whatever market conditions or whatever caused them to hit it. And it also, instead of just throwing their hands up and saying, "Well, I missed that, I'm done with it," now gives you a reason to go back out and fight for it when you can actually get it back.
And it keeps you connected, like what you're talking about. There's a level of engagement around pushing and having the rollover be there and available to you. And if we have the rollover there and available, then it keeps the engagement. If we remove we pull a chip off the table, there becomes an element of like, is the corporation setting goals and targets in such a way to try to pull the rug out from underneath me? There's that element. Or is the company, you know, just don't not want to pay me? Or, well, it just generates disengagement because I missed Q1, I missed Q2, now I missed half of my variable or my half of my available bonus. And if I miss Q3, then I might as well, who cares? I'll just, you know, you
Yeah,
know, drive it into the ground, bail out, move on, not worry about it for the next, 4 or 5 months, and we'll have all the goals reset. Hopefully, they'll be lower for the next
I
year,
was going to
and then I
say,
can rinse and repeat and try to like build myself up from there, right?
if you know you're going to tank, you might as well really tank and bottom out, towards the end. That way your goal's not set as high as if you came back and just barely missed. So, yeah, there's also that element of, hey, I'm going to drive this thing into the ground, um, in hopes of a lower goal, which is just, you're losing out so much business. Not good for the company.
The last piece of this puzzle from monthly versus quarterly is payout schedules for cash flow purposes to the employee, to the team member themselves. So those are things that you want to take into consideration too when you look at total comp structure, because we do a lot of total compensation structure planning and payroll planning and timing planning with clients. Is, if we're going to pay a rep X amount of dollars, we'll just use round numbers, $50,000 in a year, what's going to come in every single paycheck as a base? What's going to come every single maybe month as a bonus or variable? And if you start moving more of those dollars to quarterly, that moves payroll around a lot. And that could have maybe administrative, not headache on the company side, but administrative headache on the employee side, because bills don't come quarterly, they come monthly.
Yeah.
And they're not changing their mortgage payments, or they're not changing their car payments or their cell phone payments or anything else that we have in this world from a bill standpoint to quarterly. It's going to stay
Yeah.
monthly. So we want to take that in consideration around how this plays out. That also lends itself more that these quarterly, like genuine on top bonuses that are above and beyond the actual W-2 or standardized pay for a leadership. That's why these quarterly incentives make more sense than they for that group of folks rather than a field sales rep person too.
Yeah, when it's looked at more of a bonus rather than a part of my salary that I need to actually survive and live on.
Yep, exactly. Now, last way to consider doing this too would be annual goals. pros of annual goals is that it does encourage very long-term strategic thinking, which we love. We talk about that here. It is
Mhm.
great. It does usually, because it's annualized, it rewards, they could be very large in terms of scale and amount of dollars. You can align a lot of overall, business strategy. The cons are delayed gratification. And then this concept of like risk of goal drift is a good way to kind of maybe define this. And that risk of goal drift is that we're waiting to focus on it because we have so many other things we're doing. So we're going to not focus on an annual goal until the latter part of the year. So that is what goal drift really talks about. So, those are some pros and cons. For me, like, this is exclusively senior leadership from my perspective. I would never put an annual goal out to a sales rep. You want to create a problem, make an annual goals reps with your in your
Absolutely.
sales team, make an annual goal for your sales team.
And if you want to take it one step further, let your supplying partners pick the annual goal for you, right? I mean, we've all seen those numbers when you're doing planning. Maybe you're doing your joint business plan, and we see those numbers forecasted coming out. And where did we come up with these? But when those get cascaded down to the rep level and their actual salaries depend on some of those inflated numbers, you can also create some huge disconnect there as well.
For sure. And because the risk is so delayed, or not the risk, the gratification is so delayed, we do need to break this down into smaller milestones, and it needs to be incredibly transparent, and the design needs to be such a way that you can tell, like, I'm not guessing what I'm getting at the end of the year. It is known, transparent, there's transparency, and I have an idea of the exact dollar amount. I'm not Craig Griswold walking around wondering if Boss Man's going to give me a check at the end of the year. Because
Absolutely.
to reference one of our other episodes, I think it was episode 14, that's an entitlement, not an incentive. And we're talking here about incentives and trying to drive incremental behavior and discretionary behavior. And if they're guessing, or if you have your finger on the pulse as a leader of how you're going to actually pay these out, that is not an incentive, that is an entitlement, and nobody has any control over.
Absolutely.
I don't think I would have ever done an annual goal though.
Yeah, and if you were if that's kind of the line that you're trying to go down, maybe align a total house company, maybe volume or gross profit goal. I mean, to try to take those dollars and maybe shift it away from what was part of the compensation structure and more of towards a bonus. Hey, team, if we can get the company here, we're going to bonus X amount of dollars. Where
Mm-hmm.
it's a bonus, it's a plus one, it's an on top of, so where people aren't relying on that money and holding off on it until the end of the year. And if it is an annualized pod placement or anything like that, maybe overall, multiple distribution kind of drive or anything like that, the focus is only going to come in the last 2 months. And that's
Yeah.
all you're going to see. Everybody just focus on that. So if it's something that it's a new brand, it's a hot brand, yeah, we want to get out there and get after it, but we also want to support it. So maybe that's why we made it an annualized goal. Guess what? You're not going to get out and get after it right away. It's going to be behind the eight ball. We're going to miss out. And at the end of the year, that's when we're going to see all the placements come in to just try to play catch up instead of being on the offense.
Well, I chose to do everything monthly, even from even from the leadership side, because my connection to it was the most efficient way in my mind to do it, because it gave you, every 30 days you got to reset and rebalance and relook at where the business is at and how you need to keep moving the business. I had a lot of confidence in you and Tom on our leadership team that you weren't going to do things that were haywire and not connect with the business long term. Now, if I wanted to, if I never, which I never did, but if I wanted to take it a step further to the annualized goals, the way that I would do it, or even quarterly goals, is the way I would do it, is you've got to set a level of, and it's some kind of financial metric, whether it be a net income or an EBITDA, hate EBITDA, but a net income number that the business needs to obtain. And those are the financial requirements, things of, hey, we have to grow profits to be able to and reinvest and do CapEx spending and have more money to do raises the following year and a bunch of other things that we need to do as owning the business, return on capital, all that stuff. That's like a minimum bar of whatever number that is. We've got to get to that. Now, if we beat that, meet that, and be above that, that's where you can unlock these quarterly and or annualized incentives for senior leaders.
Yeah.
And I get that idea. It's elegant, it's smart, and if you can track it regularly, make it transparent, and actually educate, this is another key component, educate the leaders around these are the things that need to get done so you can achieve this, and how you can achieve it. You got to translate that down to the sales team and to the operations team and to the rest of the middle management and all the way down to the field sales reps, or all the way down to the drivers, to actually hit those objectives. So what you're doing is you're throwing out a couple different carrots. It's like, hey, carrot for senior leaders is to do X, Y, Z. They're going to break that down, be smart and elegant to push that down to the sales reps and to the frontline people. And then that's going to actually build up to, it's a top down to then go bottom back up
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah. I mean, I guess the overall takeaway too would be there is no cookie cutter, one size fits all for every business out there. It really depends on your long term goal, your business, maybe size, strategy, and maybe even a hybrid too, right? If it's not all just monthly or all just quarterly, a good mix of some of those different timings too, which also leads us into like rewards, right? Because historically, it's always been a monetary reward. It's always been dollars as far as PFP. But we hear a lot that there's some people out there that are just not motivated by money. They're not in the business. They're not in the role for just money. Actually, run across that a lot, to where maybe the spouse makes a good amount of money. They don't really even need to work if they didn't want to, but they love it. They love just getting out there and selling beer. So, PFP stuff, I'm not going to do that because it's not the best thing for my customer. And I don't really need the money. I'm not really driven by that. But there's also there's other rewards that we can splash in besides money, time off, maybe like a trip or a concert or anything like that that would motivate people. So coming down to just knowing your people, what motivates them. I mean, the ultimate purpose for an incentive is to motivate the employees, right? Align them with your company goals and drive performance. So if I need to have a reward out there, the carrot, the one carrot is not going to fit for everybody. Maybe I need to change that up. Maybe have a pool of, hey, you can choose this X amount of dollars, and added 1 or 2 vacation days or whatever it may be, to kind of entice and maybe drive a little bit more engagement across the entire board.
Yeah. There are a lot of folks that have done more sophisticated things like that, Mikey, to provide, not necessarily in the beer industry, but to provide variability or flexibility in what your reward is.
Yeah,
And
I
again,
think it
that's,
goes a long way.
yeah, and again, that's back to, these kind of high level discussions around what is your pay, what's your W-2 pay going to look like, and what's your bonus going to look like, and how do they overlap or not overlap each other. And if we're pulling out money from a W-2 expectation and moving it over to days off or to trips or anything else, like that's going to look like a pay cut to a
Mm-hmm.
sales team member. So if we're going to do some of those, or to anybody, so if we're going to do some of those, we've got to look at contributing more resources towards the total rewards package at a team or for a company, rather than moving numbers around. I could only imagine the conversation we would have had if I said, hey, I'm going to pull $5,000 from your base and I'm going to put it into this rewards package that includes trips, TVs, silverware and dishes and, housewares. And you'd be like, let me go back to my computer and print off my resignation letter.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. I mean, but there's people like me too, where time's more valuable than money, right? I would rather have a little extra time off, maybe with the family or a vacation, than maybe a few $100 here and there. So
To get on a little tangent of this, the thing that I hated the most about our rewards package, total rewards package at Atlas, is that we made sick and vacation time a currency.
yeah,
I never liked that. And for the listeners out there, what we did was we came up with this method of the madness long before I was there full time.
I think it was
And
more of a. I didn't mean to cut you off, but I think it was more of a reward for coming to work. We will reward you
exactly,
for being at work.
exactly. It was a way that we did an attendance bonus, is the way that I would describe it now. And it had unintended consequences, but the way we did the attendance bonus was if you had days left over, sick and vacation days, because we tracked them separately. We didn't do general PTO, we did sick and vacation days. If you had them left over, there were a max number you could roll over to the following year of sick and vacation. And at the end of the year, if you were above your max or if you needed money or wanted money, you could convert those days and turn them into dollars. So we created this whole currency.
And
And
actually, the dollars were worth more if you cash them in at the end of the year than if you actually use them throughout the year.
exactly. Exactly. I mean, that was the attendance bonus, was that if you came to work and were around more regularly, that you were going to be able to, cash in on these. Great idea on paper, right? Like, it makes total sense. It genuinely got people to stay and not, and make a question like, do I really need to call in sick today, or
Mhm.
would I like to have that extra money at the end of the year? So I think that worked great. Where I think it ran awry is that we allocated these resources, these days, as resources for people to take time off, and they just stopped taking time off because they wanted the money more than they wanted the time off. And we ran into more than one situation in my perspective where we either came into a burnout world, or people were around too much or where they shouldn't have been and they needed time off, or we got people that were actually trying to cash in days earlier in the year and I had to tell them no. So then it became this more of like, hey, it's June, you can't cash in all your days by June. Like, we
How do you know you're not going to be sick?
the fall six season is around the corner. Like, and then I had to tell people no, because we had no policy around it. It was at management discretion until the end of the year, which then just always felt messy to me as well.
Yeah, and then you have people coming to work sick, spreading germs because they don't want to take the time off.
Well, we used to do that naturally before COVID. Now, post COVID, we've got this whole new rule and policy around it. But, that used to be par for the course. Like, hey, okay, good job coming in sick. You're the
And
man.
you power through it. Good job. You haven't taken a day off in 4 years. Good job.
Oh my god. So that's a little tangent on attendance bonus or attendance policy as well for the crew to listen to. So high level takeaways: different strokes for different folks. Different people respond to these, timelines of incentives differently, or they have to be transparent, regardless, easily trackable, feedback loop as short as possible. Hopefully every day, if not every day, once a week. If not once a week, like, why are you tracking it? If you can't do it once a week, don't do it at all. It's just a bad idea. And we didn't talk a lot about this. We will in a later episode. They have to be simple. You have to be able to explain them. And if you can't explain them to like an 8-year-old, then they're probably too complex. They're probably too
Yeah.
many moving parts for sure. And
And you
it's
see it
not.
too. There's a lot of complexities out there. It's where the sales rep just throws hands. I'm done. I don't even understand this incentive. How am I supposed to do it?
Yes. And it's not, I say to an 8-year-old, not because I think sales reps are as smart as 8-year-olds. They're way smarter. It's just, if we can't distill it down, it's my education background in college where it was like, if we can't distill this down to a one page for a 40 or 50, what Toyota does, you can't distill a big project down to one page front and back, you don't know enough about the project to actually get it approved. If you can't explain it to an 8-year-old, you don't understand enough about what you're asking people to do, and
Absolutely.
and what you're trying to get them to do. That's my perspective on it. So moving on, Mikey, a little bit of news.
Big news.
We think we may, you made the point, you think we may have gotten our large player to step into the hemp market.
Yeah, I think we've seen some people standing on the sidelines now, kind of watching how it was going to play out. And then in the news, we do see a larger player. I think somebody that's been kind of lining themselves up for this moment for a while now, step in and say, hey, here we come. Watch out. Step aside. Listen up, everybody.
Listen up. What's the brand? Would it be Shock THC, or to be Top THC, or Hemp Shock, or Hemp Top?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean the possibilities are endless. I guess regardless, what we should be excited about seeing is, and I truly believe this is what they've been lining themselves up for, but is a non-alcoholic beer flavored THC drink.
Yep. So what we're talking about is Tilray Brands is made news publicly saying that they're going to step into the hemp market and the Delta 9 world, for sure. And others too, right, Mikey, as they get more and more legislation or legal clarity. This is just the beginning of them stepping into the hemp market, really.
Yeah, yeah,
And Mike and I are, we Shock Top has a very, very, very fond place in our hearts as a fun brand. Not everybody's cup of tea. So we're still trying to find out, what THC. I
well,
think like hemp
I
shock is an awful idea, right?
it is, but if you went old school with it, if you think about where Shock Top originated, right? It was the Michelob seasonal. When Michelob brand family was like, we need a seasonal, and then we had the what is Jack's Cask Winter Ale or whatever, Jack's Pumpkin Spice and Cask Winter Ale. But that Shock Top was originally spring heat spiced wheat. So what if it was spring heat spiced weed?
This is spring heat spiced weed.
Yeah, who knows, man? But big news. I'm interested to see how this is all going to play out and some of the next steps, what those are going to be. But I mean, talk about already having a really good distribution network set up and already having some pretty powerful brands. I mean, one of their major brands is already called 420, right? We all know what 420 is. So I think that what we are going to see come about in the next 12 months is probably going to shock and surprise a lot of people, but also not really surprise some people as well. So, but it's going to be interesting to see how it all plays out and where this goes.
The big question comes from a route to market around leveraging their distribution network they already have in the US. Is some are choosing to, because the distribution network is very, very split on this. I don't think that if you look at MBWA membership as a whole, where all the serious players of beer distribution are members of, and you probably got a fair 60-40, 50-50 split between who's going to get in and who's not going to get in. And this is our first major player. And although Tilray may still be small compared to, the Constellations and the ABs and the Millers of the world, I get it. But they are a major player. They sell a lot of product, a lot of beer, and they are getting involved. It begs the question, what is going to happen from suppliers or from a distributor's perspective when they have more and more supplier pressure of getting into this? Because we have a culture of following along and getting in line and doing what our suppliers would like us to do as partners. We think about the business and very partnership centric. Not everybody's going to be cool with this, though.
No, no, and I mean, they do have some money, right? They have that Canadian weed money that from Canada because they're the largest THC supplier in Canada. But so maybe they're going to have the dollars that what's going to be needed to kind of push some federal regulation along too. So who knows? To where maybe some of the distributors would be a little bit easier about making that decision.
I just think about the economic challenge of if you've got network of 500 wholesalers and you've got half of them, you got 100% of them that have all of your brands, and you have very good like economic efficiencies for shipment and shipping lanes and everything else. And then you bring out at hemp products and your THC products, and you've got half that want to take it, half that don't. So now you have this isolated 250 wholesaler universe just for fun that is like just selling your hemp products, the cost of servicing that is incrementally way higher from a supplier perspective. So that will lead to a lot of difficult conversations between a brand owner like a Tilray and its distributors that choose not to get into this because we need, from a supplier perspective, they're going to say we need to have shipping lanes and consolidation around servicing the market. Now, that might not mean smaller and smaller wholesalers. That might not mean going from 500 to 250, but that definitely doesn't mean going from 500 to 750 as a
Mhm.
total network for sure. So, these are the challenges that we're going to have these conversations as an industry. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out for sure.
Absolutely.
Well, good episode, Mikey. For the listeners out there, thanks for joining us. And until next time, cheers.
Cheers.